Sarah sat quietly at a small corner table in a cafe, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She had spent the last few months reflecting on everything that had happened since the arrest, and today she was meeting with someone she never thought she'd have the chance to talk to. Across from her sat Senator Laura Green, who had been at the center of the controversy. Sarah had arrested her during a traffic stop months earlier, and now the two women were meeting face to face. "I never wanted to question you," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "But I couldn't ignore what I saw that day. I wasn't trained to handle situations like that. I thought I was just doing my job." Senator Green nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "I understand. I was angry too. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about that day, and I've come to realize that we both had more to learn." A sudden noise broke their conversation as a barista dropped a cup nearby. Both women jumped slightly at the sound. The tension lifted, and Senator Green smiled gently. "You know what I remember most about that day?" Senator Green asked, her voice softening. "Not the handcuffs, not your harsh words. I remember thinking, she's scared. Under all that aggression, she's scared." Sarah felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She had never thought of it that way. "The training program you helped create is making a difference," Sarah said, shifting the subject slightly. "I visit the academy sometimes, share my story with the recruits. Some listen, some don't, but at least they hear it." Senator Green nodded thoughtfully. "Change happens slowly, person by person, story by story," she said. "My father finally watched the body camera footage last week. He called me afterward, crying, and said he was sorry for teaching me the wrong things." A police car cruised past the coffee shop, its siren faintly heard. Both women watched it go by. "I missed the job," Sarah admitted. "Not the person I was in the job, but the idea of helping people. Really helping them. Not just enforcing rules based on prejudice." "Have you thought about what's next?" Senator Green asked. Sarah pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse and smiled. "I've been accepted into a social work program focusing on community relations and racial justice. It feels right. It feels like the next step." Senator Green smiled in return. "We need people who understand both sides of this issue, people who have learned from their mistakes." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sun filtering through the cafe windows. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Why did you agree to meet with me today?" Senator Green considered the question carefully. "Because healing happens face to face. Change requires both accountability and forgiveness. And because sometimes the people who've made the biggest mistakes become the strongest advocates for change." As they finished their drinks, Senator Green reached into her bag and pulled out a small book. "It's about unconscious bias. I think you're ready for it now." Sarah took the book, noticing the senator's personal notes scribbled in the margins. This wasn't just a peace offering, it was an invitation to keep learning and growing. They left the cafe, not with hugs or dramatic gestures, but with a simple handshake. Two women acknowledging their roles in a story bigger than both of them. "Keep doing the work," Senator Green said simply. "I will," Sarah promised. And for the first time in months, she felt truly worthy of being believed. 1 year after the traffic stop that changed everything, Sarah stood in front of a room full of new recruits at the Atlanta Police Academy. Her story was now required learning for all officers in training across the state. "My badge number was 2749, Sarah began, her voice steady now. "For 6 years, I thought I was a good cop. Today, I'm here to tell you why I was wrong." The recruits listened intently as Sarah shared her story. Some seemed curious, others skeptical. But as the training program and her story unfolded, they began to understand. Sarah showed body camera footage of the traffic stop, making the recruits watch the painful moment when she treated Senator Green harshly. Some of the recruits shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "This video isn't easy to watch," Sarah said after the video ended. "But it's important that you see it. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let my biases dictate my actions." "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," Sarah continued, walking among the recruits. "I'm here to help you recognize what I couldn't see back then, how bias affects every decision we make on the street." She paused, making eye contact with each recruit. "You've all been through the new training program. 200 hours of bias awareness, community relations, de-escalation techniques. Some of you probably thought it was overkill." Some recruits nodded hesitantly, unsure how to respond. "Let me tell you what I learned in the years since that traffic stop," Sarah said, pacing slowly across the front of the room. I learned that good policing isn't about power, it's about service. It's not about fear, it's about understanding. She clicked to the next slide, showing a chart with statistics from the department's new community oversight program. Complaints are down by 40%, use of force incidents reduced by half, Sarah explained. These numbers represent real people, real lives. Every time you put on that uniform, you're not just enforcing laws, you're building or breaking trust. Officer Martinez, now a sergeant, entered the room carrying a box. Sarah smiled at him before turning back to the class. In this box are letters, Sarah said as Martinez set it down. Letters from people I wrongfully stopped or arrested during my time as an officer. I've read each one dozens of times. They're part of your required reading now. She pulled out one letter. This one's from a teenager I handcuffed because he looked suspicious, walking home from basketball practice. He's in college now, studying criminal justice. He says he wants to change the system from within. The recruits passed the letters around, reading quietly. Your training includes something mine never did, Sarah continued. Regular meetings with community members, not as suspects or witnesses, but as partners. You'll hear their stories, understand their fears, and learn their perspectives. Senator Green moved to the front of the room. Officer Reynolds is now head of our department's community relations unit, she said. She works with both officers and citizens to build bridges that should have been built long ago. Sarah nodded gratefully. Every month I meet with new officers struggling with their own biases, she said. I share my story, but more importantly, I listen to theirs. Change doesn't happen through shame. It happens through understanding. She clicked to her final slide, showing a photo of herself with a group of community leaders, including Senator Green, at the opening of the new Police Community Partnership Center. Next week, you'll graduate. You'll get your badges and your assignments. You'll feel powerful, Sarah said, looking at the recruits. But remember this, true power isn't in your weapon or your badge. It's in your ability to serve everyone in your community with equal respect and dignity. After the presentation, the recruits lined up to talk with her. Some shared their own stories of bias. Others asked for advice. Sarah listened to each one, remembering her own journey. Later, as she packed up her materials, Senator Green approached. They listened to you, she said, because you're living proof that people can change. A year ago, I lost my badge, Sarah said, gathering her things. But I found my purpose. As they walked out of the academy, the new recruits were practicing traffic stops in the training yard. Sarah watched them carefully, observing how they followed the new protocols, respectful, professional, and aware of their own biases. One class at a time, Senator Green said softly, as they both stopped to watch the recruits. One change at a time. Sarah nodded in agreement. It's all about making progress, even if it's slow. Every little bit counts. She smiled as she watched the recruits work through the exercises, feeling a sense of pride in how far things had come. It wasn't just the recruits that had changed, it was the whole system, slowly but surely. I used to think the system couldn't be fixed, Sarah said, reflecting on her journey. I thought it was too broken to repair, but now I see that if enough people are willing to change, it can be done. Senator Green smiled at her, proud of the woman she had become. You're living proof of that, Sarah. The change you've made is incredible. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years, a sense of purpose, of making a difference. I've still got a long way to go, she said modestly, but I'm not doing it alone anymore. Together they watched the recruits complete their training. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft glow over the academy grounds. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling hopeful about the future. The real work is just beginning, Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. But I'm ready for it. Senator Green nodded. I know you are, and so are they. As Sarah turned to leave, she looked back at the recruits one last time. They were talking to each other, asking questions, sharing their thoughts. She knew they had a long way to go, but the seeds of change had been planted, and for the first time in a long while, she felt optimistic about what the future held. One step at a time, she whispered to herself, smiling. 2 years later, Sarah stood in front of another classroom, this time in a larger training facility. The room was filled with young officers, eager to learn and ready to make a difference. As she prepared to speak, she glanced at her notes but quickly put them aside. This wasn't a scripted speech. It was a message from the heart. "My name is Sarah, and I used to be like many of you," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I thought I knew what it meant to be a good cop. I thought my job was to protect and serve, but the truth is, I was harming the very people I swore to protect." The recruits were quiet, their eyes fixed on her. Sarah could see the skepticism, the doubt in their faces, but she also saw the potential for change. "I'm not here to tell you what to think," she continued. "I'm here to show you what I've learned. The world you're stepping into is complicated, and the job you're about to take on won't always be black and white. But if you can approach it with an open heart and a willingness to grow, you can make a difference." She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence in the room was thick, and for a moment it seemed like time stood still. "I've been through a lot to get here," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. "And I'll be the first to admit it's not easy. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, and it's a process that never ends. But I can tell you this, it's worth it." Sarah looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each recruit. She could see that some were still skeptical, but others were beginning to nod, starting to understand. "The change isn't going to come from me," Sarah said, her voice strong again. "It's going to come from all of us. You are the future of policing. You are the ones who can shape this profession into something better, something just." The recruits were listening now. Sarah knew that for some, this might be the first time they were hearing this message, but it was a message they needed to hear. It was a message of growth, of change, of accountability. "I've made mistakes," she said, her voice steady, "but those mistakes don't define me. They've taught me and they've helped me become a better person. I hope you all will learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make the same ones." As Sarah finished speaking, there was a moment of quiet. Then one by one, the recruits began to clap. Sarah smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made a difference, one recruit at a time.